And then they said, we're making butter. And they had a little glass jar, and they had put ice cubes and cream in the glass jar, and they were each shaking it for like 15 seconds, and then they would hand it to the next person. And if you put some ice in a little mason jar with some cream, and you have about 35-year-olds shake it for 20 minutes, you get something that's passably butter. And they can each put it on their little crackers and have snacks. And that's what I assume kindergarten is like. Because that's the only thing I remember.
I didn't think this topic would go in that direction.
No.
Okay. So Prop 8 passed.
Prop 8 passed.
Which stopped
and
gay
Prop 8
marriages.
Took effect the day after the election was certified.
Okay.
So pretty much almost immediately after November 4th, gay marriages were no longer allowed.
So there were
almost immediately, the people filed suit in the state courts on a variety of grounds to try to overturn the proposition. Some people tried to say it shouldn't be certified. Some people said other things about it.
Wasn't a big argument about it changes the Constitution?
There were a bunch of arguments. The main arguments that eventually went to court were that Proposition 8 was passed as, it was a proposition, so they got it on the ballot by having a certain number of signatures of people sign the proposition to get it on the ballot. And the state Constitution of California says there are two ways you can amend the Constitution. They say the people can do it by proposition, and it's also the case that the state legislature can pass something. And there's also a mechanism where people present a change to the state legislature, which vets it, approves it, and then it goes on the ballot. Propositions are supposed to make minor changes to the Constitution. If there's a significant change, it's supposed to go through this vetting through the state legislature after people have signed it.
Okay.
So one of the arguments that was heard in state court was that Proposition 8 wasn't something that was minor enough that it could be a proposition. So since it was presented and passed that way, it shouldn't be allowed to take effect. And that if they wanted to take effect, they'd have to go through the vetting and the approval of the state legislature by a certain proportion of each house.
Okay.
So that worked its way through the state courts. And the state Supreme Court eventually decided that Proposition 8 was possible to pass as a proposition. It wasn't the scale of change that necessarily had to go through this more complicated process, so they allowed it to stand. They did say that since, the wording of the Constitution doesn't have any time limits in it. It just says these marriages aren't recognized. So there are a number of people that had been married before Election Day. You would think that the simple reading would be, well, their marriages aren't recognized. The state Supreme Court said that's not the case. The state will recognize any marriage made before the day the proposition was passed.
Right.
You can't have any more, but the people before that don't have to deal with well, you were married for a year and a half, but now your marriage has been annulled. Now do you have to go back? Do you have to refile your state taxes since it turns out you weren't married when you said you were married? What if you bought a house together and you said, we're married?
Right.
And then one of you stops making payments. Can the bank sue both of you, or are you not really married? So the Supreme Court said those marriages are valid, even though they're not between a man and a woman, but no new ones can be created.
Okay. So Prop 8 was upheld at that state court
Prop 8
level.
was upheld at the California Supreme Court level.
Then it went to another court.
Well, it didn't go to another court. That was the end of that set of appeals.
Right.
Because that was a question about the interpretation of the California Constitution.
Yeah, so that argument was finished.
The California Supreme Court is the final arbiter on questions about the California Constitution. Around the time that the California Supreme Court decided that, people filed cases in federal court.
So a new case.
And I think there had been cases filed in federal court even before that. The case filed in federal court was asserting that even though the California courts found it was constitutional, that it was not constitutional under the federal Constitution. And the federal Constitution is supreme over the individual state constitutions.
Right.
So if it's illegal federally, even if the state constitution says it's that way, the state can't enforce it.
Right.
So
Which part of the federal Constitution?
most recently, so this case, which was decided about 2 weeks ago by Judge Walker, said that essentially there are two reasons under the federal Constitution that it is unconstitutional. He said it's a violation of the Due Process Clause of the Constitution, and it's a violation of the 14th Amendment, which requires violation of due process, and 14th Amendment kind of requires the state government to treat all of its citizens equally.
The Equal Protection Clause
of the 14th Amendment.
Right. So he
And he
decided
said
that,
both of those it's in violation of both of those.
Right.
So he found that Prop 8 was unconstitutional and said, I don't think this can stand. But he put a stay on that decision.
What is a stay?
A stay says, I have decided, but I'm going to temporarily keep my decision from taking effect until we until we find out something else.
Okay.
He put a temporary stay because he said, I'm sure you guys will want to come in and talk about whether I should have a permanent stay. So that happened last Friday, and he this morning announced his decision on whether he would enforce a permanent stay on his order
breaking news
or not.
today.
Breaking news
Today.
unless you've read the internet in the last 10 hours, in which case it's old news. We're back to Lindsay Lohan, who I believe fell down earlier.
Okay.
So today he came out and said he is staying his order until, and I think it's next Friday.
I think it's next Wednesday.
It was 6 or 7 days,
Yeah.
and I don't recall if it was from today or I think it was the 16th or something. He was doing that in order to allow the Ninth Federal Circuit, to decide whether they would want to put a stay on his order. So now the pro Prop 8 side, will go to the Ninth Circuit and ask them, please take this case,
Right.
and please stay this order longer than next Wednesday until you take this case and decide it.
Okay. So then, who's going to decide if the stay continues? Will it be appeals court?
So Judge Walker is a judge in the Ninth District. His decisions can be appealed to essentially the Ninth District itself. The Ninth District will pick a panel to hear that appeal. I think the panel is chosen randomly, although I think judges can decide whether they want to be in the panel or not. And I think it's a panel of 3 judges will initially we'll look at it and decide whether the circuit court wants to even take it. And then I think if they take it, I think the same 3 judges take it and then decide, although it might go to a larger panel. I don't remember those details. Eventually, the Ninth Circuit will either decide to take the case and decide the case, or they'll say, we see no reason that Judge Walker's decision needs to be overturned in any way. And then whichever side loses in that thing will almost certainly take it to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Okay.
And that first step will probably take like a year. So it'll be a year or 2 from now before it gets to the federal Supreme Court.
Your best guess, will the stay continue until that's... It's hard to say?
It's hard to say.
Okay.
I mean, on human rights grounds, it would be great to say, well, we think it's unconstitutional. We're just going to let people start getting married. But if it's overturned,
again, you have a window of people.
you have this window of people, and it's less clear if you got married during that time whether those marriages should stand or not. Because if that decision's overturned, then the California Constitution has always said that marriages should only be between a man and a woman, and yada, yada, yada.